Hi, and welcome to episode 1 of Nonfiction for Life, the podcast with authors who write compelling true stories and books with great ideas for living well. I'm your host, Janet Perry, and today we'll be talking to Alissa Parker, author of the memoir, An Unseen Angel, a mother's story of faith, hope, and healing after Sandy Hook. Alissa grew up in a suburban Utah town where she married her high school sweetheart, Robbie Parker, while he pursued his education in various cities across the United States. Alissa gave birth to 3 blonde little girls. Their young family was living very happily in Connecticut when on the morning of December 14th, 2012, 20-year-old Adam Lanza entered Sandy Hook Elementary School and shot 20 children and 6 adults. Among the children killed was the Parkers' 6-year-old daughter, Emily. She became one of the victims in what is now on the books as the second deadliest school shooting by a lone individual in American history. This sudden tragedy forced Alissa to re-examine everything she believed about God and His purposes. Desperate to work through her grief, she began writing a blog that she named the Parker 5. Let's pick up the conversation there. What was it that made you decide to go public with your blog?
Well, that was kind of out of necessity. I wanted to write like no one was reading it and made it specifically for myself. And when I had it private, I opened it up to family and friends because it helped me be able to communicate to them without having to use energy to communicate with them, if that makes sense. And as the requests were coming in, I was the only person to be able to allow people to read it. And I found myself just exhausted by all these family and friends requesting to follow my blog, but also their friends that could benefit from reading it.
Just a couple months before Emily died, your father died unexpectedly of complications from a bicycle accident. Is that correct?
Correct. He was riding in a race and collided with another cyclist and had a traumatic brain injury from that and died of injuries afterwards.
You say that as difficult as his death was, his passing actually helped prepare you to deal with losing Emily. What was it about his death that prepared you for Emily's death?
When my dad died, I found myself in a position of where I wanted to be the pillar of support for my mother. And so I remember at the funeral home wanting to be there and take a lot of the burden from her and wanting to, stay with her, help her make the decisions. And so I had gone through this whole process with her, trying to be her support system, not realizing that only in a couple months from there I would be at the same exact funeral home making the same exact decisions for my daughter. And having just gone through that with my dad, I knew what to expect. I knew what was going to happen. I knew what decisions they were going to ask of me. And at a time where I was completely broken and I couldn't think straight, it really helped to know what was ahead of me and how to prepare for those things. And in addition to that, just on the grieving side, I'd had just a couple of months of knowing what I did with my dad. It's hard to explain it, but I understood how I grieved. I understood how my body responded to my dad leaving. And in some ways, having those couple months of reflection before Emily died, I understood how I was going to react. I understood where I was going to need help and what challenges I was going to face. I knew my weaknesses and my strengths because I had gone through them to a lesser degree, meaning in intensity with my dad. It was painful to lose my dad, but he wasn't a part of my everyday life like my daughter was. And so it was a very different circumstance, but yet I understood so much more about myself and I was prepared to make the decisions that I needed to make at a time that I just felt completely broken.
Mm. Well, death struck early for both of them. And when that happens, we often have a tendency to live with regrets. What have you learned about letting go of regrets?
You know, I think I think the way I've looked at my regrets, and I don't really have any regrets with my father per se. I think my regrets with my daughter were less about my day-to-day life with her and more just like I wish I would have done more to protect her. And so I've had to come to understand where that's coming from and how do I change what I wish I would have done and apply that to who I am now and how I can become that person. And so I've had to evaluate the way I respond to things. And if I see things that need improving and I've learned to be more assertive and not just leave it to someone else to make sure that my daughters are safe at their schools or safe at, a friend's house or, and it can expand to many different things. But I guess the way I've dealt with my regrets is I've learned to strengthen the weaknesses that I've had in the past.
Well, let's loop back to this whole idea of grieving. You describe the way you and Robbie were dealing with your feelings as leaden grief. And although most of us don't experience such serious, sudden, or brutal tragedies as the two of you had to face, all of us eventually have to face grief on some level.
Right.
What are a few things you've learned that might help others who are in the thick of grieving?
I think the thing that I learned about myself the most was to have patience with the process and understanding that my low energy, my inability to concentrate, my inability to focus and do the things that I used to be able to do that seemed so basic, was going to take time to come back, and that was okay, and that I had to learn to accept my limitations and not beat myself up for it. And that was really hard to do in the beginning because I'm not by nature a very patient person, especially with myself. I move at a very fast pace, and to feel so limited as a mother, a role that I don't want to say came easy to me, but was natural, all of a sudden became very difficult for me. And I had to learn to change my expectations and to adjust what my role was and to redefine my successes for myself, and that it was measured very differently than it was before. And so for other people, just be patient with yourself and realize it just takes time. It just takes time.
There's no clock that people can set for grief. We've heard that.
Right.
Is really important. Well, you not only had to deal with your own grief, but you were also helping your surviving younger daughters, Madeline. Is it Madeline or Madeline?
Madeline.
Madeline and Samantha deal with their feelings because they had lost a sister. So what specific strategies have you found effective in helping them in their journey with grief?
Well, one of the things that my counselor, when I was in therapy, really taught me was to take care of myself first. And that seems very counterintuitive when you're a mother. You want to take care of your children first. And she taught me to instead of focusing all my energy on them and ignoring my own body and my own spirit, my own soul, that I needed to really take time to be in a good place so that I could model that behavior for them and create um, and a real life instruction for them on how to process your emotions in a healthy way that I was going to teach them by showing them instead of telling them. And for us that that didn't come natural to me, but as I started to do it, I really felt like they were incredibly responsive to that type of response. And I felt that it opened up a lot of dialogue, honest dialogue between myself and my children, and they asked me a lot of questions, and I was able to answer honestly because I was working on the same things that they were working on. And that became very important for me. And when I deviated away from that, when I'd forget, my therapist was there to remind me to reset myself, take care of myself, take those moments and and focus on my health so that I could be that example.
So you were their living, their living manual of how to deal with grief.
Right. And also to show them that I made mistakes as well, and to own that, and to say, you know, I'm learning as I'm going too, and we're figuring this out to some degree together, and that it was okay that mistakes were made. It was okay that there were times that I lost my temper and I had to explain to them, I have a lot of emotions that I don't know how to express right now, and I need to work on that. And we learned a lot together, and I think it's strengthened our relationships. We're very honest with each other. My daughter the other day said to me, "Mom, you're the best free therapy ever." And I just laughed and I was like, "What?" And I said, What do you mean?" And she said, "Because I can tell you anything and you don't cost any money." And I thought that was really funny. First of all, we've never even talked about therapy and what it costs as far as that's concerned. So I just felt so out of the blue. But what it showed me was that as of right now, that could change when she becomes a teenager. But as of right now, we worked really hard on creating an intimate relationship where we can express ourselves in a safe way to each other. And that's important for me.
Well, it seems like we are hearing in the news more and more about terrible acts of violence, and more frequently. So some people begin to believe that people in general are fundamentally evil.
Yeah.
So after you and your family were touched so personally by the Sandy Hook shootings, you wrote about struggling with these feelings yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Can you read to us some of the things you wrote about that?
Sure, of course. I did not want evil to win out. So much had been taken from me by my... Sorry, let me start over. I did not want evil to win out. So much had been taken from me by an evil act, and I was determined not to give that darkness any more power over me. And later, it was hard for me not to feel that power of evil was winning in the world.
So not only you, but you realized as more and more became aware that more and more people were paying attention to Sandy Hook and what happened there, that their hearts were broken. And you said, the hearts of many were broken by the violent deaths at Sandy Hook, and their sense of balance in the world was shaken to the core. So with all this happening, your own balance thrown off, you realized that other people were thrown off, and they were trying to cope with, is the world good? Is the world evil? What was it that helped you cling to light and goodness instead of giving in to the idea that evil was going to triumph? And what do you tell other people who have similar feelings?
For me, it happened very early on that I would have these moments of seeing the kindness of and other people and the things they were doing for us that just um, slowly and simply just touched my heart and showed me that there was so much good. And when I came home from um, the funeral, we had just thousands and thousands of letters that people had sent us. And I was reading all of these people um, who had been touched by what had happened, who had been devastated by the loss, but also had been expressing their love of God. And that was unique to me to see people of all walks of life, all faiths, all backgrounds have this common love. And I understood in a way that I had never prior to this experience the far stretch of God's love for those around us. And I felt like I was this witness to this miracle of seeing how this dark shadow that everyone else saw brought out so much light to counter it. And it was important for me to stand up and be a witness to that and to tell people how incredibly beautiful and powerful, but it's also quiet this light is, this good. And you have to look for it and you have to choose to let it in. It doesn't just penetrate your heart. And there's days that I don't always see it and I don't always let it come in. And I have those dark times, every once in a while still. And they're tough and it feels really lonely in that moment. But I have to seek out the light and find it and choose to let it in because otherwise I find myself staying in those dark places if I don't allow that light in.
I want to talk about that moment where you met the father of Adam Lanza, the shooter at Sandy Hook. How did that meeting change your feelings? First of all, can you set the scene of how that played out?
So we had arranged to meet with him, and we were meeting in this office building. And I remember just sitting kind of in the car with my husband prior to going in and just feeling so incredibly nervous. And I'd felt so strong and passionate about this message that I needed to talk to him about and feeling like it was the right thing to do. But then being faced with the actual moment of doing it, I felt incredibly intimidated and just nervous. And I remember when we were going into to meet with him, we were going into the elevator, and I kind of just needed a moment to just clear my mind and kind of pump myself up for doing it. And this man was walking towards us, and my husband held the elevator door open for him. And I remember being kind of irritated, like, why do you have to be so nice? I needed a moment alone, and you had to hold the door open for this person. But we stood there in the elevator, and the man turned to us and he said, I want you to know how much I appreciate you being willing to meet with me. And it was him. And I wasn't quite prepared for that moment in the elevator to talk with him. And I remember kind of feeling like I needed to hurry and escape. And so as soon as we got up, I said, I had to go to the restroom. And I went in and I just sat and composed myself to kind of say a prayer and just be prepared and ready to talk with him, and that I would be able to say the things that I needed to. And in my head, I wasn't there to hear what he had to say. I just wanted to talk. And I really wasn't thinking in terms of what he would share with me and what that would do for my life.
And what did it do for your life? How did you change after that moment? And what did you learn about forgiveness?
I think up to that point, I had looked at his son as um, a monster and a monster only. What he did that day was so incredibly horrific and horrible, and I didn't want to see him any other way. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to see him as anything else. It felt comfortable and it felt good to see him in a way that um, made me feel angry at him. And so when I was sitting there with his father and he started to just tell us about him and his story and his struggles, instead of him being just the monster that day, I saw him for the whole of his life versus just that one moment of who he became.
Mm.
And I could empathize with the fact that he had something he was struggling with his whole life and that he never got the help that he needed, and how incredibly difficult it must have been to struggle with what he struggled with. And I thought about if my own child was struggling with those things, and how incredibly isolating that would feel, and how I would want the best for them, and what I would do to try and help take care of them, and feeling like there weren't resources around me to help me. I imagined what that would be like, and I thought of other kids that struggled with that, and how incredibly important it is for us as a society to embrace those kids and get them the help and love and treat them with respect and not hostility. And so I just all of these things is, just were churning in my head, and it just really it changed him in my eyes. It made me look at him as a child of God rather than just that monster, and that really scared me. I
Mm.
didn't want to go there, and I really wanted to resist it. And I did as long as I could, but just each of these moments were just these small moments that slowly thawed my heart. And it was not a quick thing, but yet it was incredibly important for me. I needed to heal, but I wasn't actively looking to do it quite yet.
Mm.
But I knew that I see how important it was for me to have that happen when it did in my life, because I think that my hardened heart was preventing me to feel and experience the things that I actually wanted to feel.
One of those things you really wanted to feel was reconnected to Emily. And
Yeah.
in fact, the morning that she died, the two of you were in her room where you had stenciled flowers on the wall above her bed. And she insisted on pointing out how the flowers were connected. Can you read that part of your book where you write about that?
Yeah. Do you see these flowers, Mom? One is pink with a black center, and the other is black with a pink center. Do you see it, Mom? There's a connection. If you look around, you will see there's connections everywhere. Isn't it exciting? Everything is connected.
So that was the very morning you lost Emily. What connections do you think Emily wanted you to see then, and what connections are you seeing now?
I think that in her mind, she was realizing how connected the world truly is, and how things relate to one another. Because she I didn't write about this in the book per se, but she started to just talk about all the different things that she saw connections with in the world, and she was truly just discovering, I guess, the magnitude of the world and how big it was, yet how it made sense together, how the pieces fit together, and that she could connect things that you wouldn't normally put together, and recognizing how they impacted each other. And so it's really sweet to see, your child just kind of have these epiphanies, these moments where just like these aha moments. And for me, I feel like losing her showed me this entire world that I didn't know existed, this pain and this connection of a mother to a child, and the extreme feeling of loss that you feel. All these things I had never understood. And I had to figure it out. I had to make sense of it and figure out what those connections were in this new world. Just like she was trying to make those connections in her world, I was doing the same thing. And as I saw those pieces really come together and start to make sense, I realized how beautiful those connections are, and how God's hand really is involved so much in our lives when we don't even really realize it until maybe afterwards, when we can step back and see the entire picture of what had just happened to us.
Well, being connected to God and is definitely a theme that goes throughout your entire book. And clearly from the title of your book, you believe in angels. In fact, you believe your daughter Emily is an angel now. And in the book, you describe feeling her presence a couple times. Yeah. Those experiences must be very sacred to you, yet you're willing to share them in a book that's public. It must be a very important truth to you that you want other people to understand. Can you share, what is it you want the world to know about angels and about these connections with maybe unseen beings?
I think that we all deal with death and dying in our lifetime. It's unavoidable. And it's something we all want to understand and learn from each other. This was the first time in my life where I was in a position to be grieving with a large amount of people who had lost their child the exact same way that I had. And none of them were of my same faith and background. And yet I desperately talked to them about what helped them, what did they experience, what was their values, what did they have to lean on to support them through this experience. And so as I began sharing my experiences on my blog and seeing the response from people whom I did not know, and feeling this shared camaraderie, if you will, with these people that had gone through a loss like mine, I realized how incredibly similar my experience was to theirs. And none of us necessarily were of the same faith or belief system, yet we were having those same experiences with those who we had lost. And I felt like it was really important for people who knew of what had happened to my daughter to understand the peace that I had found in knowing what her new life looked like. And I wanted them to understand that there was this beautiful side of this tragedy that hopefully would balance a little bit of the darkness that took away the life that I had envisioned for her. But I wanted to share with them her new life.
And those connections that you had with people left behind. You have had 4.5 years since this tragedy, and you have come to see the world in a different way. In a pretty dramatic shift. So could you how would you summarize the most fundamental changes in your personality and just in your approach to everyday living? Knowing now that one moment you can be with a person and the next moment they can be gone. What have you learned and how have you changed?
I think I've changed in a lot of ways. I feel like I've aged 20 years, but
Oh.
aside from that, and I say that lightheartedly, I promise. But aside from that, I would say that I've learned to be very present in my life and in the moments in front of me. And partly because I have a lot of anxiety, and part of, just dealing with anxiety is learning to just be very present in things. But having to slow my life down and not be able to accomplish, all of the things that my to-do list encompasses has really taught me that I don't have to have a long to-do list, that I can slow my life down and just do what is important to me and my family. And that has helped me, I think, be a better mother. It helps me listen to my children more and to value my experiences with them. And it's not about necessarily the amount of time I'm spending with them, but every moment that I am, that the quality of it is enriched, and that we can really enjoy each other's company. And I've talked in part of the things that are one of the things that I talk about in my book at the end. I do photography, and a lot of people hear that I live in the Northwest and they think, how do you deal with living in such a cloudy, overcast area? And for me as a photographer, I absolutely love the overcast because it just brings out the richness of color instead of having it be blasted out by the sunlight. And so I love taking pictures in overcast. And so it's a beautiful place for me. And a lot of times I think the same way about my life, that, there has been some overcast in my life, but it's helped bring and enhance those colors around me so that I can see them and appreciate them in a way that I don't think I would have before. And I think I would have just been trenching along and working my way off my to-do list and not valuing those small moments with my family the same way.
And the beauty, what a fabulous metaphor that is. Well, one of the things that you've done going forward since Emily's death is you've started a couple of nonprofit organizations, and one of those is called Safe and Sound Schools, which you founded with your dear friend Michelle, who also lost a child at Sandy Hook. Can you talk a little bit about that organization before we go, and tell us how your involvement is helping you heal, and also what it's doing for parents and educators and children?
Oh, absolutely. So after Emily died, I remember sitting in bed at night and just thinking about what happened that day and how simple it would have been to slow down this intruder and prevent the mass harm that he was able to do. And I remember talking to Michelle about it and just saying, oh, how do we just share this with people? How do we help people know what we have learned and what they could do to prevent this from happening in their school? And that was really the beginning of Safe and Sound, was this idea that we could share with others the things that we had learned and the tools that we had gathered from different experts around the country, and be able to give it to them in an accessible way and hopefully inspire them to make changes that schools, school safety is not regulated by the federal government. And on one hand, that is an incredibly powerful thing for communities to be able to say, so we can make the change ourselves. And we wanted to give them all the tools that they would need to be able to accomplish that and achieve school safety in their own communities. And we thought that coming up with Safe and Sound and those tools for families could be a way to make sure that we were doing our part to make sure that this kind of thing wouldn't happen again.
Where can people find out more information about Safe and Sound Schools?
If they go to safeandsoundschools.org, all of our free information and tools are there. We also go out and speak and help educate different schools and school communities across the country to teach them, to help them, and to give them the information and the experts that we have at our disposal in a way that hopefully can give them the push that they need to be able to know exactly what to do and how to get started. So, yeah.
I'm Janet Perry, and you've been listening to Alissa Parker, author of An Unseen Angel. You can find links to Alissa's book and her Safe and Sound Schools website in the show notes and on the blog at nonfictionforlife.com. Don't forget to sign up for our email updates and subscribe to the podcast in iTunes. Thanks for listening to the Nonfiction for Life podcast.